Now, did I intentionally clickbait you with the thumbnail? Kind of. I'll get to that in a bit. For now though, I want to talk about the duality of how which brand you decide to choose both matters a lot, yet doesn't matter much at all. Trust me, it'll make sense if you proceed. Before we get into the video though, I'd like to thank this video's sponsors. RC Trophy Chasers is a hobby shop based in the Carolinas that carry Mach 1 servos, DFX batteries, Motive motors, and recently added dialed RC 8th scale tires. All of which I've either used and approve of, and or have seen other use to great effect. If you want to get your hands on any of these or any other RC accessories like lead finger bodies and tools, be sure to use code ROACHRC565 at rctrophychasers.net in the description below to save 10% off your next purchase on every single item. Next up, we have CalRC, your one-stop shop for all things maintenance related to RC in general, not just racing. From chassis and tire cleaner that doesn't dry out your plastics or rubber, to rubber building mats that keep you organized, to small things like high-quality brushes. If you want to save a bit on your next purchase from CalRC, be sure to use code ROACHRC all caps to save 5% off on your next purchase. Lastly, I'd like to thank A-Main Hobbies for supporting me for so long. A-Main Hobbies is the largest distributor and RC distributor in the United States, and they carry pretty much everything you might need. Anything you guys purchase using the affiliate link in the description below, along with any of the discount codes I've mentioned up until now, will directly support me as well. With that out of the way, let's begin. Why don't we start with the points that go into why which brand you decide to run matters a lot. Let's get the big part out of the way before anything else. Parts support. Let's face it, if you're a newer or even intermediate level driver, chances are you're going to break something on your car, be it in 10th scale and 8th scale. And trust me when I say not having the part you need to fix your car if it does end up breaking is a terrible feeling. The best way to remedy this is to choose a car that everyone else runs, so if something does go wrong, chances are somebody will have the part you need, be it at the hobby shop attached to the track or one of the racers having it in their toolbox. Then again, I wouldn't recommend relying solely on others if you have a choice in the matter. If possible within your budget, I'd highly recommend buying different parts and stress parts of your car that are either likely to break or possible to break. These universal items that go bad on all cars include but are not limited to arms, steering components, C-hubs, pillow balls, shock components, turnbuckles, internal transmission gears, and Eastern chassis if you run a worn-out chassis on 8th scale or a team associated B7. This also feeds into my philosophy of keep supporting one car as much as possible rather than stretching your means in order to run two. Keeping one car at 100% all the time with refreshed suspension bushings, oils, and other parts is a lot easier and cheaper than running two cars and keeping them up to snuff. So yeah, when adding everything into your cart, make sure to budget yourself so you can afford extra spare parts here and there. Another big plus as to what brand you run matters a lot has to do with setup support. There are many different track styles and surfaces around the world that demand different setups and driving styles. Having a car that is widely used by many different people around the world in different situations and tracks is very useful for one major reason, and that's setup advice. But not in the way you may think. You see, I'm a very big believer in, let's call it the anti-pro setup gospel. I've explained this in my last video that when a pro looks to set up their car, they do so in the interest of speed and not much else. As a result, they do things to their cars that sacrifice driver ease in favor of said speed. This in turn makes these pro cars almost undrivable for your average racers. You know, the same racers who go on to pet at RC and copy a pro setup without much thought. My main point here is that the more people who run a car, the more truly good resources you have to make your own car work the way you want it to. Take for example the EB48 2.1. Again, I promise I'll address the thumbnail soon enough. Since the Technos are extremely popular here in the US, you can find lots of really useful setup tips from Techno themselves, loads of sponsored drivers, and a good amount of privateer drivers who just know the platform very well. Meanwhile, when it comes to my Gamma, I'm kind of on my own when it comes to setuping different tips and tricks to make my car both faster and easier to drive. Also, because of the wide variety of places the EB48 is run, you'll find a setup for pretty much any and all track conditions that will work as a good starting point for you to work off of. The last major point I want to talk about fluctuates in the previous points: company longevity. In the world of RC, brands tend to fluctuate in terms of company stability. While some brands may do very well during a season, other times they won't. Take Kyosho for example. Once upon a time, they were pretty much on top of the world in terms of 8th scale. For a time after that, however, they were on the brink of collapse and lots of Kyosho drivers were left scratching their heads wondering if Kyosho would survive or not. Want a more modern example? HB Racing is in a very similar situation, only they arguably have it a lot worse as a lot of their team members have left due to lack of payment, and HB as a whole has really lost a lot of the good reputation they have garnered throughout the years. These days, pretty much all HB drivers I know personally have either switched or are planning to switch to other more stable and or established brands where they can find lots of support both in parts and from their respective brands' teams. And that's really the key part of this whole section, support. Racers like to feel supported in their race programs and not feel like they're on their own. RC racing, despite what you may think, is a social sport where there's a lot of interaction between racers both on and off the track, and being able to share different pieces of information between each other about a shared platform is a very important part of it. Now that I've said all this, why does the title of this video say does and doesn't matter? Well, it's time to talk about that. When it comes to RC racing brands, A-Scale especially, you're spoiled for choice. Hell, I made 2 videos totaling about 45 minutes talking about nearly every single A-Scale buggy you can buy today. Nearly being the operative word. Sorry, Caster Racing. Anywho, my point is there's a lot of choice when it comes to racing brands. However, an issue arises when people tend to gravitate towards 1 or 2 options. What basically happens is when 1 or 2 brands gain a lot of popularity, they tend to increase in popularity in an exponential way. When a brand of car becomes popular, stores and hobby shops will stock parts for said car. Now that parts are abundant, when someone new gets into the racing scene, they are pointed in the direction of said popular car because parts are abundant. Repeat this cycle a few times and you have our current situation. Now, why exactly am I framing this as a problem? Well, there are 2 reasons why. For one, this means that someone who would benefit from running a different car that will favor their driving style better won't be encouraged to do that. There are a few cars on the market right now that I think would do well in the hands of many less experienced drivers that don't get a chance because they aren't a mainline brand, at least in the modern world. A good example of this would be the Kyosho MP10E. The MP10E is by far one of the most stable and easiest to drive e-buggies I've ever driven. And if I wasn't currently running this Agama N1E, I'd probably be running the Kyosho. However, because Kyosho, at least in my geographic area, isn't as popular, someone who would greatly appreciate its handling characteristics wouldn't give it the time of day and be steered in the direction of a more popular but harder to drive buggy, like the B4E when that was still the main A-Scale buggy Team Associated made. This isn't related to lower tier drivers either. Some more experienced drivers would also benefit from experimenting with different platforms that would benefit them as well. A good example for this would be the Mayako MX-8 or MX-8E. Someone who would appreciate a very tunable and customizable buggy would greatly benefit from the Mayako or even the Sparko. Now of course there are certain brands out there that aren't too popular for either other reasons beyond just people not wanting to try them. Some brands out there don't really do much to differentiate themselves or make themselves stand out. So why even bother going with a brand that hasn't been proven or tested by a lot of people and will be hard to find parts for? Especially if that brand is similar enough to another popular brand that already has a foothold. Think the difference between WIRC and Mugen Seiki. However, for brands that do try to do something different like a Gamma or perhaps Mayako, they tend to suffer because of this mindset. For 10th scale, things are a bit more complex in current times. You see, for a long time, whenever someone asked me what two-wheel drive buggy they would buy if they're just starting out, the first answer would usually be the RC10 B6 two-wheel drive buggy in any of its iterations, from the 0 to the 0.4. It was by far the most durable, easiest to work on and build, and most abundant buggy on the market for a long while. With the release of the B7, however, things have sort of changed. Even though it's still a very popular and good buggy, it doesn't seem to be as durable, or if you want to be harsh, idiot-proof, as other buggies on the market. People are having many issues with the front chassis breaking, transmission gear stripping, and C&D blocks breaking. All issues that the previous B6 didn't really have. However, because the B7 is a Team Associate, it will no doubt sell to both experienced and newcomers alike. And if people's reactions to the B7's durability are to be believed, this may be an issue. As it stands right now, I would genuinely say that the B7 is not the best option for newcomers to the 10th scale racing scene, as it simply isn't resilient as other buggies on the market today, particularly regarding the Mugen MSB1 and surprisingly, as I've come to learn, the Schumacher LD3. However, people will still get the B7 because it's an associate and thus a safe bet, even though there are better objective options out there. Now this may change when the B7 1.1 comes out, and everything I mentioned prior will be rendered moot, but for now, I don't think I'll be running a B7 anytime soon. At the end of the day though, you really shouldn't be relying on store stock for spare parts. Most of the time when you're buying a new kit, or from a store, or from online, you should be saving up for enough parts to go along with it to make sure you don't need to buy extra parts to go race when you're at the track. Of course, supporting your local track where possible is preferable, however sometimes they won't have everything you need for your particular car, so having a decent stock of extra parts is very much a good idea. As a result, if you're going to buy a new kit with many spares and tuning options to go with it, the risk of trying a brand that may not be as popular but still very good, like for example Mugen, Yokomo, Kyosho, Mayako, Agama, and a few others, is minimized. And because the cars are so similar these days, the tuning principles for each one tends to be similar enough to where knowledge from one platform can be transferred to another. The things I've learned on the Agama N1E platform can be transferred to other C-Hub platforms, like the Kyosho MP10E, the Mayako MX-8E, or the Tekno EB48 2.1. Another thing to always remember about running different brands is this: it isn't your car that's holding your back. Mostly. You see, a good way to gauge the potential of the platform you're running is to look at what other fast people with that platform are able to do with it. For example, Will McIver is a very fast driver and able to do very well at races with the Agama N1E, a buggy that many look down upon for its weird design. Because of this, I know that the car has the capability to do very well on many different surfaces. It's up to me as a driver to make those things happen. Same thing can be said for pretty much every other brand out there and then some. I will also say that a lot of people like to change brands very quickly in an attempt to become faster. This is rich coming from me, but doing this isn't going to make you go faster. The main reason I personally switch brands more often than you should is because I like to give you guys content on multiple different platforms and give you an idea of what is and isn't worth trying or spending your hard-earned money on. For an average racer who doesn't need or want to make content on RC racing, I would recommend sticking with one brand for a long time to learn that specific platform, amass a large amount of spares, and learn all you can about driving. Now this leads us finally into the thumbnail question of this video. Why don't I run Tekno? After all, they are the most popular brand for A-Skill in my area and possibly the entire US when it comes to general support, both in parts and setup. Hell, I'd be willing to say at least 60% of all the buggies and trucks at the North Georgia Shootout this year were Teknos. Well, I have mentioned in the past to a few people that the reason I didn't run Tekno before was because someone in a Tekno fan page called me a racial slur when I was still uploading to different groups on Facebook. After being in the hobby for longer and seeing that Tekno doesn't really stand for such tomfoolery, this isn't really a valid reason for not running Tekno anymore. The main reason now as to why I don't run Tekno is precisely because of their popularity in terms of YouTube. Okay, this may not make a whole lot of sense initially, but let me explain. There are a lot of videos related to Tekno on YouTube from very good creators, from the less known like Toco Loco RC and the much more well known like Mark San Maria, links in the description below. And I feel like I'd be sort of diluting that pool as it were with my own take on the Tekno brand. If too many people make a video about the same thing, your audience becomes diluted and your retention suffers. The other more personal reason comes back to my own personal bias of wanting to try something other than the status quo. I enjoy trying different, unconventional things, and in a hobby where it's meant to be enjoyable, well, that's what I find to be enjoyable. So yeah, no personal grudge against any popular brand and anything like that, just me wanting to try different and odd things. With that being said, it's time to wrap up. If you guys enjoyed this video and would like to see more, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel as well. Secondly, I'd like to thank my patrons for supporting me well. Very recently I ordered some new stickers with the new pixel art design of my channel name, so if you'd like some, be sure to check out my Patreon as well. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my active patrons Michael Williams, RC World Discord server, Casey Nix, Ben Reeves, Dave Armstrong, Rob Bedingfield, Caden Merks, Ian Petrie, Zach Hawes, Jeffrey Kunz, and especially Buddy Howell and Morrison Wan. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.